Hey class, my name is Richard Kelly. In this presentation today, I will be discussing my senior project for our Integrative Studies Capstone course. The topic I will be covering is the integration of women into Combat Arms Occupational Specialties, or I might refer to it as Combat Arms MOSs at some points. Um, and it's all the same. I chose this topic because it is an issue that we are currently dealing with in the military. It currently impacts me because of what I do. I serve in the Army National Guard right now, and in the future, I plan to be an Army officer, and I will have the responsibility of ensuring that this integration is done correctly and is not impairing my unit in combat effectiveness. So I use Repco's 10-step research process, as I believe most of us did, and it served as a great outline for me, and it helped me to confront the complex problem that I had presented. This gave me, like I said, a basic outline to basically work through my project because I didn't understand exactly where I wanted to start when I was first getting into this, and I found that by going through each step, that my project started to kind of fall together, and it made it a lot easier. I didn't necessarily follow these in order. I found that when I was conducting the literature search, it made it easier for me to find relevant disciplines. And then, when I found those relevant disciplines, it actually kind of in turn made me do better research because I knew what I was looking for specifically. So I'll go more in depth about this in the following slides. Because this is such a hugely debated issue relevant to me and my future occupation, I wanted to further understand how to make the integration successful, which actually wasn't my original focus question, and which was, should women be allowed in these combat roles? However, I decided to go a different direction because Congress had already mandated that branches of the military start opening these positions up. And so I turned it into a different question, basically trying to ask how we can make this successful because it's going to happen anyway. So some sub questions I had were how to determine, what success is, um, what is success, and kind of determining that metric. So like, you know, based on like how are we gauging that? I also began to think about current barriers that kind of prevent success from happening, which include anything from public barriers, public perception, personal between somebody that they just don't like, have personal biases, and peer perception, how people that you work with around you view you, uh, how they are treated as well, and internal issues such as like sexual assault. It's a huge problem, and getting psychiatric care for something like that, or PTSD from that, or combat zones. So using the interdisciplinary approach here, I have a little graph or a little diagram to show you kind of the relationships each one of these have with each other. And you need to ask yourself if there is a simple solution to this issue, and if there isn't, why not? This is how I approach this. What made it a complex problem? And there, when you start to try and figure this out, there's so many different influences and entities with this specific problem that have their own, that drive their own agendas and interests that have to do with the topic. So, for this instance, if we look at the general population or public, there are a vast array of opinions. Some people believe that, still have that old idea that a women's role is in the home, and they should be taking care of the kids and cooking dinner and stuff like that while their husband is out doing this kind of work. And others feel like, women should be able to do everything their male counterparts do. Uh, the military possesses the goal of keeping our country safe, and, and aiding other countries, and keeping our force as lethal as possible. So we don't just have one goal here. We need to protect ourselves. We have allies that we are promised to protect, and then we also need to be as lethal as possible. So our politicians are kind of caught somewhere in the middle because they want to give people equality. They want to give the public equality like they want and deserve. But we also need to keep the people safe, and completely achieving one of these goals might have a negative influence on the other. We don't know. So we can't just say, let's open these jobs up to everybody, because it's a little deeper than that. If we do that, we might sacrifice something that we don't want. So when you start taking a look at relevant disciplines, you want to ask yourself, like, which disciplines have the greatest impact on the complex problem. The disciplines I chose for my topic also changed, much like my original question, as I went through the research process and I began to learn about like the difficulties women face in the military. Because I learned a lot more about this than I thought I would being in the military itself. I didn't know some of these things, and potential solutions to these problems as well. I was able to attribute them to these three disciplines on the screen here, and it really started to align. They actually align with my current concentrations. These are my three current concentrations. So I don't know if I did that unintentionally, but intentionally, or if it's just how it came out. But I found that this was the three disciplines I was going for. Covering military studies, I look a lot over military history, and in this situation, how the women's role has changed and developed over time. Before they weren't allowed in the military at all. Then they came in at first becoming nurses, and then they started kind of being able to be cooks and supply, and eventually they got pretty much to where they are today, or recently before 2013, where they could pretty much do everything except combat roles. I also learned about the different physical and mental effects on women. Uh, these women are more prone these women in our military are more prone to being victims of sexual assault, versus a male in the same specialty. The woman next to me at work is more prone to being a victim of sexual assault than I am. From a health sciences perspective, you could argue that their bodies are also built differently, and that their different physical standards are required of these women, even though they are doing the same job as their male counterparts. I also looked at the leadership role that our leaders within the military and high-ranking government officials as well had in fostering a positive environment for successful integration. And I believe this is probably one of the most important things. These leaders have the responsibility of ensuring that their females are being treated fairly and are able to report incidences such as sexual assault. They also need to hold everyone, no matter sex, to the same standards and to the same responsibility level, and keep it there no matter what. So literature search is actually kind of where I started off first, as I discussed previously. I didn't know exactly where I was going when I got on with the proposed topic I had at the time. And I was kind of just looking for information relevant to women in the military. I started to read about difficulties they face, problems that have been caused in the past in different units, and there's even stories about how difficult it was to be a woman in an occupation that's comprised of predominantly men. You can only imagine. And a lot of these units that were having difficulties suffered. They were combat ineffective in some situations where women were out there and people got hurt. After I gathered all this information, I came to the realization that integration was happening no matter what your opinion was on the subject. It doesn't matter what I view, it doesn't matter what you view, really, because it's already happening. So that I didn't need to go for should women be in combat roles anymore. And then I needed to focus more on something that could solve the next issue, and helping them integrate into a predominantly male role. So I started asking myself, what research had been done already, current proposed solutions. I was looking for, are these solutions effective? Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. And then what more could be done? So with developing adequacy in relevant disciplines, I have Repko's definition up there on the screen, and I'll read it real quick. Adequacy is the understanding of each relevant discipline's cognitive map sufficient to identify its perspective on the problem, epistemology, assumptions, concepts, theories, and methods in order to understand its insights concerning the problem. The way I understand this is we need to understand not just that things happen or that a certain instance happens, but why they happen. An example I have up on the screen for you is you don't just need to know 5 times 5 is 25. You need to know the process and how to get there. You need to know that 5 times 5 is 25 because it's 5 times, if that makes sense. Basically, we need to develop a fundamental understanding of how these disciplines work in relation to our complex problem. So for my example, I interpret this as a way of saying it's not enough to just say that our military leaders have an important role in integration, but we also need to understand why they have that important role, the background in which they base their views and decisions, and how they approach that topic. I think it is super critical. This step is super critical in understanding and conducting the last 5 steps of the research process. Analyzing the problem and insights. So the problem is actually starting to happen already. We have started to experience difficulties associated with integrating these women into combat arms, and the overwhelming majority of today's military, including women, agree that integration of women currently with what is in place right now would not be extremely beneficial. Many people think military men don't want women in these roles because their roles are masculine in nature, but men and women alike actually both agree that women can conform to one standard could successfully discharge responsibilities of that job, and that would be okay. Psychologically speaking, men and women are wired differently. We have different levels of chemicals in our brain that make us think different. And women are also more likely, as I said previously, to be sexually assaulted. And most of the time it's from within our own ranks. So these are kind of the health issues that you look at from that perspective. This offers new psychological problems for women a lot of time because there is trauma associated with that. And it reduces unit morale and combat effectiveness because there's no trust there. So leadership has again, what I stress is the most important role out of this, and making sure that their unit is fully mission capable by making sure these standards are upheld even when challenged. Identifying conflicts between insights. So there are a few key conflicts that need to be addressed. The first one being ideologies, societal and military. Military ideologies are largely based on history, and they are slow to progress. They're not as progressive as society is today. So from a health perspective, people within our ranks will argue that women aren't built to carry 120-pound combat loads, and they're just not built to do that. But from a scientific and medical standpoint, we obviously know that there are some out there that could have the potential to do that. Health professionals promote being able to get help or report when someone is a victim of sexual trauma, but a lot of times many of these people feel like their leadership doesn't care about them, so they just won't report it. Some leaders will argue that they care but don't really doing anything about it, and some leaders actually argue that this isn't their issue, which I totally disagree. Leadership in the military, as I've said 2 or 3 times now, has a gigantic responsibility, and I believe the biggest responsibility in making sure that the environment is a positive one that fosters teamwork, which would include being open to women being in a combat role next to you if you're a man, you know, but some men feel like this is intrusive to their free beliefs and that women shouldn't be there. Throughout history, our ideologies have continued to change. In the military, still, like I said, slow, not as fast as society. But research into military studies shows a correlation in these ideologies and how our psyche has developed. So, as a leader, your responsibility is the health and well being of your unit, and you're looking out for the group as a whole, not just a specific individual. However, if a specific individual is experiencing things such as sexual trauma and it's bringing down the whole unit, then that is something you do need to address. Instances such as sexual abuse and trauma are largely agreed upon as something that severely impairs the capabilities of units. This is largely supported throughout history since women have joined the ranks alongside men. You can look back at the beginning when we opened all the military academies, and it was such a prevalent problem then as well. In general, the disciplines I chose tend to agree that more needs to be done and that they need help from the other disciplines in order to achieve a more complete solution. None of these disciplines believe that they can solve the solution by themselves, and that they know there is another perspective on it, and that needs to be addressed as well. Integrating these insights. Leaders should step in and make sure that everyone within their ranks are getting the proper medical treatment they need at a basic level, not just if they're going to experience sexual trauma. They need to be healthy individuals in order to be efficient. Doing so would greatly increase the amount of people actively receiving treatment for anything and could help improve the health of the force overall. And health professionals and military minds alike agree that there are some women who can physically outperform males, and because so, they should be able to fill in these roles if they are able to, prove themselves. Leadership bears the burden of changing this ideology that women shouldn't be allowed in combat roles because they're girls and they're weak or whatever have you, and that it should move towards being more of a progressive state where everybody is on a level playing field no matter your sex. Produce an interdisciplinary understanding. So what I have listed here is the results of my research and kind of what I recommend moving forward. We talked about leadership and how critical a role that was to successful integration, and I believe that putting qualified women in positions of leadership is one of the most effective ways to improve integration, because women feel more comfortable reporting it to other women because they don't feel like they're getting blown off. Communication, exactly what we just talked about, is key to success and efforts towards integration. Shining a positive light into the public eye, so saying, we had 2 women graduate Ranger School, could show that, maybe this isn't just a profession for women and men, and maybe women can do it. Increasing awareness of sexual trauma, creating a more welcome and inclusive environment where they will report such incidences and receive treatment. So just making sure that everybody knows it's not a problem we're shying away from, and we're trying to solve. Men and women are different how they are built, but that does not mean no woman could succeed in a more physically demanding job than her male counterpart. And being a male doesn't inherently mean you are better suited for that task or a combat job. Standards-based approach in all facets needs to be implemented so that qualified personnel are carrying out their duties no matter their sex. That's the end of my video. Here's a list of my references. I hope you guys walk away with a better understanding of this complex issue and what your role is moving forward and how you can make this better.